Gewaltig. Okay, so I believe yesterday we got up to Ma'ashlamim, Faglim Uspaglin, Avkol, Faglim Uspaglin. But we could go back to the top of the Amud, and the Gemara wanted to know, how do you know that just because Chatos touches another carbon, whatever is absorbed into the other carbon has the din of a Chatos, how do you know that applies to all other carbones? So the Gemara had a Hekesh that Makish, Shmuel brought a Hekesh from a pasuk that's Makish all of the carbonos to each other. And the Lashon of pasuk was Zois HaTorah La'oila La'mincha V'Lachatis V'La'asham V'La'milum V'La'Zevachim. So we learned from Oila that the shechita needs to be with the chalif. We learned from Mincha it's only eaten by male kahanim, and from V'Lachatas, which is where we're up to, right at the top of Tzadik Ches Amud Aleph, we learn that Machatos Miskadesh B'Belua I've called Miskadesh B'Belua. What do we learn from Osham? Ma'osham Ein Shvir V'Shilya Kadosh Bo. An Osham, never will you have a shvir or a shilya, which is like the placenta and the fetus, will never get a kedusha. You know why? Because an osham could only be brought from a male animal. Av kol, so too carbonis that could be brought with a female animal, like a chatas or a shlomim, ain't shvir v'shilya kadosh boy. If they had a shvir or shvilya inside, it would not be kadosh. Now we do know that a vlad chatos is mesos; it has a kedusha to it. So how does that fit in with what we're learning here from Osham? Zok to Gemara kasavar vlados kachim b'aviyason hen kedoshim. Even a vlad of kachim, like a vlad chatos, when does it get its kedusha? It gets its kedusha when it's born, but while it's in its mother, it has no kedusha at all. And v'don and efsher misha yefsher. You might argue, I don't understand. How could you bring a raya from an osham, which can't even have a shilya or a shvir, because it's a male animal? How could you bring a raya to a chatos or a shlomim, which could be brought from a female animal, that over there the shvir and shilya doesn't take on the kedusha? The teretz is because we hold, Shmuel holds, the don and efsher mishi efsher. You could learn something where it would be possible, like chatos and shlomim, from an osham where these things wouldn't be possible because the osham was only brought from a male animal. Miluim, what do we learn from the carbon miluim? Ma miluim mashreim b'sreifa. First of all, the miluim, the only extra you would have from it that was left over would be nicer, left over from the meat. And left over from the meat, you burn. But ve'ein ba'alei chai b'mashreim. It's impossible to have a live animal that was extra. Why can't you have a live animal that was extra? Because by the miluyim, they didn't separate extra. Where do you find people separate extra? By a personal chatos, for instance. Someone's chayv chatos. What he might do is he might separate two animals for a chatos and say, if something happens to animal A, we'll use animal B. So now, if nothing happened to animal A, so now B is extra. So the halacha is, ve'ein ba'alei b'mashreyan, they don't have a din of noiser. You don't burn those like noiser. Rather you could redeem them unless it's a chatas or mesos. Av kol moisreim b'shreifa ve'ein ba'alei b'mashreim. Shlomim. What do we learn from our carbon shlomim? We know that the whole parsha of Pigel was only said by a carbon shlomim. The Torah only taught us the parsha of Pigel by a carbon shlomim. So we learn mashlomim mefaglin or mispaglin. Just like a carbon shlomim could be mefagel, meaning if the shlomim becomes pigel, the accessories to the carbon, like in the sochim, also become osur to eat. Umispaglin, and the carbon itself can become pigel. Avkol mefaglin umispaglin. Every carbon is subject to the isser of pigel, not just a carbon shlomim, which is where the Torah taught us. We talk to head of Gemara weiter. We must need a ton of mishmeid Rabbi Kiva. In the Brayta we learned in the name of Rabbi Kiva, mincha, ma mincha miskadesh bebalua, avkol miskadesh bebalua. Now this is not like what Shmuel said. Shmuel said we learned from chatos that is mekadesh b'belua. So why did we need to have the same limit for mincha? We actually need both mincha and chatos to teach us that all other karbonis are mishkadesh b'belua. Why? The Yashmina mincha, if we only knew by mincha, I would say the adi de rekicha, since the mincha is soft, it's a soft consistency, it could therefore penetrate better. Mivla, aval chatos emaloi. Maybe a chatos that's not so soft, maybe it could not penetrate as much. V'yashmina chatos. But if we only know by chatos, that's mekadesh. Mishum de karir. What does the karir mean? So Rashi has the following explanation of the word the karir. Tirish tirit belaz. Mitoich shabosar av, since the meat is thicker, nichnas besoicha yashumen ba'imkon. Since the meat is thicker, it will penetrate better. So just to see the exact height of karir, mishum shabosar ova. When you're dealing with thicker meat, it allows the fat to penetrate it better. Aval mincha, but maybe not a mincha. Zog to gemara tricha. That's why we needed tzai chatos and tzai mincha to teach us that it could penetrate another carbon, and it would also you treat the other carbon just like what it was penetrated by. Chatos, what do we know from chatos? Ma chatos einava elam nachulun. Just like a chatos, you cannot bring it from meiser. You have to bring it from chulun. Ubiyoim, and you can only bring a chatos by day. Ubiyode hayamanis, you need to do the avodah with the right hand of the kohen. Of course, so to all karbonis einava elam nachulun. Ubiyoim ubiyode hayamanis. Frek gemar v'chatos minolam. How do you know that the chatos gufa has to be done biyoim minachulun of yodahimanis? Amar Abchista, Amar Kar, the pasuk says the hikri v'harin is parachatos asher loy. It has to be his mishaloi v'shloi mishal tzibur. The chatos that the kohen brings, that Aaron the kohen brings, has to be his own personal carbon from his own personal resources and not from the tzibur. V'loi mishal meiser, can't be meiser. Biyoim. It also has to be done by day. Frank the Gemara, I don't need a hekesh from chatos to all karbonos to teach me that all karbonos have to be makar by day. Because in the pasuk rounds up all the karbonos, at the end of the sukkah of karbonos, and the pasuk rounds up the whole parsha, the pasuk says, mi bayoim tzivsai, nafka. We learned it from bayoim tzivsai. The pasuk says, Asher tziva Hashem es Moshe bar Sinai, b'yoyim tzavoi soyes b'nei Yisrael la'akir v'es karboneim l'Hashem b'midbar Sinai. We learn from there that karbonos have to be brought by day. So Kamar ina chanami kedi nasva. That we're saying you learn from the hekesh is it's extra. It's not really true. He just said it, but it doesn't really mean that. Okay. So Kedi Nasa, the way he teaches is that so you don't learn it from chatos, you actually learn it from B'yom Tzivsai. Okay, Zogt Gemara weiter. B'yodai hayamanis. How do you know that you have to yutafka the right hand of the kohen? Midarabba bar Chana. We know from the limud that was taught to us by Rabbi bar Chana. Domer Rabbi bar Chana Omer Shlokish Kolmokim Shtemar Etzba Uchahuna. Whenever it uses the word Etzba and Kahuna, Einoi El Yamin. It only means Yamin. So Nachamal for the Gemara. Why do I need the Hakesh to Chatos? We have a rule. If it says Etzba or if it says Kahuna, it means Yamin. And every single carbon either uses the word Etzba or uses the word Kahuna. So once again, why do I need to learn it from the Hakesh? Zok to Gemara, Kedi Nasva. The same thing. Maybe it was listed as learned in the Hekesh just as a bonus, but that's not really the Mikol. The Amar Etzba Kuna Kuna Boy Etzba. There's a shaila. Does the parsha need to mention side the word Etzba and side the word Koyin? And only then do we say it means his right hand? Or would either word alone by itself tell you that it's the right hand? So Rabbi Shimon holds that Etzba L'Bay Kuna, the word Etzba indicates the right hand, but the word Kuna does not indicate the right hand. So therefore, Kuna Boy Etzba, and therefore, not all their karbanis say Etzba. Some say Kahuna only. So you wouldn't know that the karbanis where it only says Kahuna, but doesn't mention Etzba. You wouldn't know there that it has to be the right one. Therefore, we would learn it out of Chatas through the Hekesh. Okay, Gavaltik. Asham, what do we learn from Asham? Ma Asham atzmoisav mutarim. Just like the Asham, its bones are mutar. How do we know the bones are mutar? Zokt Rashi, we know the bones are mutar because Rashi says, Ani Shemati, I heard how we know this. Sharei necha l'kayhanim, because the kayhanim eat the Asham. And the noiser ba'atamis lo shayich ela b'davar necha. And you can't say there'll be a chiyav noiser, there'll be an isha noiser on the bones, because noiser only applies to something that eat. So min asvara, I know that the Asham atzmoisav mitarin, afkal, so too all the karbonis atzmoisav mitarin, even the oila. Now this has a little bit of a problem. So let's just peek at Tosfos a little bit. Ma Asham atzmoisav mitarin, pirish b'kontris, lasos ben kalim. You'd be able to make kalim out of the bones. Ani Shamati. And I heard Zok Rashi that Asham Pashad Loi Shatzmoisav Mutarin. How do we know by Asham Gufa that the bones are mutar? Shrei Nechel Kayana, because we know that Asham is allowed to be eaten by Kayanim. V'noisha B'Tzamis Lo Shayich, and there's no shaychus to a chi of noiser and isha noiser by the bones. Why? Elo B'Davar Nechel. So therefore, Av Kol V'Afilo Oila. We boily. So what I don't understand, Zok Tosfos. Hanami chatos have a motzi yalef. You could have learned to some chatos because chatos also is nechal l'kayanim. So why did we pick Asham? Any pasuk, any carbon that's nechal l'kayanim, we would learn from that the bones are going to be mutter. V'nir be'enai. Therefore, Tosfos argues on Rashi. Tosfos says the miloi yiyah yiseir nafkalei. By Asham it says lo yiyah. It should belong to him. The bones are given to him. It says that by Asham d'chsivbei lakoina sheyechaper boy lo yiyah kach b'yishakundus. So he's quoting this from Rashi. Our Rashi doesn't have that. Our Rashi does not say that. But I'm sorry, Rashi does say that. I apologize. It's the very next Rashi. Av kol v'afilo oila we boily. This is Rashi talking. So that is Rashi. According to the svara of Rashi's Rebbe's, who say that any carbon that can be eaten, from there you'd automatically know that its bones would be mutter. Come to Chaysh, you only really need a hekesh for a carbon where there's no heter achila of the basar. Because any carbon for which there's a heter achila of the basar, according to Rashi's Rebbeim, minasvara I know the Thomas Shamuter. It's only by oila, where the whole thing is burnt, where I'd have a havamina to say that the bones are usher, that's what you learn from the hekesh. Zaktoizus, but kasha mishlomim, or mishar kasha benacholim, nelef. Let's learn from there, v'lama ichtav Asham. Why did it have to be by Asham? It could be by any of the we could have learned from any of the things. So Toy says the Shloimer are keeping the shark bonus shrichi kol chad lemilsei kedemafar shocha. Since each one of the karbonis has a limud that's designated that has to be learned b'davka from that carbon, therefore loy nelef mineu davar achar. You wouldn't necessarily learn other things from each of these karbonis. You'd maybe limit what we could learn from each of these karbonis to one item. Says, we said a similar svara before, that maybe once we already know that we're learning one thing out of this carbon, we don't have a haichacha to learn other things out of it as well. Okay. It's very obvious to me. Dam chatos lamata v'dam oil lamayla. What happens if dam chatos spritzed on your beged? So what is the halacha? We know it has to be sparkly. That's the halacha that we learned. But what happens if on top of the dam chatos, dam oila spritzed? So Rashi says, nofal dam chatos tchilo ala beged, the chazer v'nitis dam oila al oisei kesem. Now the dam oila did not get absorbed in the beged, because the beged was saturated with the dam chatos. So the halacha is ton kibus. Avada, it's partial that it needs kibus, as Rashi says, the dam chatos noigay bebeged uvalu boy. The dam chatos is touching the beged and it's saturated the beged. But boy Rava, what would be if dam oila lamata? The first dam oila spritzed on the beged, which has no chi of kibus. The chi of kibus would not apply to an oila. V'dam chatos lamaila, and then there was dam chatos on top of it. So it's not volua in the beged, the dam chatos, it's just touching it. Now, what would the halacha be? Mishum noigeahu is the reason why the Torah is mechayev kibus is because the dam is touching v'ham noigeah, and here the dam chatos is touching the beged, as Rashi says. Shedam oila nivla beged. The dam oila is absorbed within the beged. Therefore, ucheshenofel dam chatos alav. When the dam chatos fell on top of the dam oila, noigeahi bebeged. The dam of the chatos is touching the beged, but it cannot be absorbed in the beged because there's no room left, because the beged is already saturated with the dam oila. The savala is already zat, it's already satisfied. Bebelua dam oila. So do you say mishum negehu? That's the chiv kibus from negeya, and the dam chatos is touching the beged? I don't mishum belu. Tafka if the dam chatos is belua in the beged, v'haloi bala. That was the shaila. Hadar pashta, then Rava was poshed the shaila. The ain't to un kibus. It wouldn't need kibus because what's mechayiv, the kibus is only if it's below in the beged, not if it's merely touching the beged. Amar Rava, pshitali, it's poshed to me. Dam al bigdoi chaytitz. We know the halacha is if your beged is dirty and it's tamei and you need to toivel it, and there's a stain on your beged that you're makbid on, you don't want it there, that would be considered a chatzitza. Chaytitz of Rashi, leinin tefila bebeged shenit. But v'im tabach, what if he's a butcher? A butcher is not makbid if there's a blood stain on his beged because he's dealing with blood a whole day. So therefore, v'im tabachu einei chaytitz. Why Rashi says she'einei makbid v'dam shal bigdai? Because he's surrounded with blood. What about revev al bigdai? What if there's, Rashi says, anything that could drip, like fat or chelav, different type of fat, or wax, there's like a drip of this beged. Again, chaytis. Most people would not want that on their beged. They're makbid on it. It would not be a good tefillah if you toivel with that on. But what if he sold wax for a living, or if he sold fat for a living? So then in chaytis, because to him it doesn't mean anything, because he deals with that all the time, and his begadim are dirty from that. But boy Rabbi, the following shayla. What if there was dam v'revev al bigdoi mahu? What if he had both a blood stain as well as a wax stain on his beged? Now, im tavachu, if he's only a butcher, well, he might not be makbid on the dam, but typically mishum revev, but he would be makbid on the wax. Be moicha revevu, and if he's a moicha revev, typically mishum dam, he would be makbid on the dam. So what's the shaila? So the shaila is like tricha the ovid haveha. You have a fellow who's a double merchant. He has two businesses. Sai is a butcher, and Sai deals in wax or in chelav. So both of these items don't bother. So what do you say? Achadalai cup and a tarti cup, even though he deals in both, and normally he wouldn't be makbid on them, but maybe it's one stain. But two stains already, his beged is completely filthy, that already he would be makbid on, and therefore it would be a chatzitza, a dilma, a tarti nami like cupped. Or maybe, being that dam doesn't bother him, and revev doesn't bother him, even if his beged is stained with both, he wouldn't be makbid. As Rashi's hoyle v'shneim ragel, he used to both of them, and therefore it would not be a chatzitza. Zakam or teku, this remains a shayla. Baruch Hashem, we were zoichet to finish the 11th parak of Zevachim, Dam Chatos, a very sadistic parak, learning about Blias and learning about Taruvas, B'lineder hadin loch Dam Chatos, B'lineder hadin loch Dam Chatos, B'lineder hadin loch Dam Chatos. Let's start the Mishnah. Tful Yoim. A Tful Yoim is somebody who already went to the mikveh, and the only thing that's preventing his tahara is that he has to wait till nightfall. Or or it's already nightfall, but he has to bring karbanis the next morning to be mater him in kachim. So either way, this person may not eat kachim, and he's a kohen. The halach is einan chalkin bekachim lachoil leher. Tonight he'll be able to eat kachim. Right now he can't. So if they're giving out shiore carbon that's normally distributed to the Kahanim, can he get a piece? Right now, when I'm in the lineup, I can't eat it, but I can eat it tonight. So the question is, would we give it to him? Zok to Mishnah, you don't give it to him. What about an oining? An oining is Rachamon L'Tzlon. Somebody lost one of his krivim, one of the 7 krivim, so he's not allowed to do avodah, and he's not allowed to eat kachim. But as soon as the day is over, he's allowed to eat kachim. So once again, oining, Noigeya, he could touch karbanis without passing them. Unlike a mechusha kaborim and a tfil yoim, they'll pass the carbon if they touch it. But an einin will not. But the einay makriv, he cannot be makriv karbanis, and as well the einay chaylik lecholer, he will not get a chaylik. They will not give him a portion to allow him to eat that night. Okay, what about bali mumen? A bali mumen cannot do avodah, but a bali mumen is allowed to eat kachim. So bali mumen, bein bali mumen oivin saif, it's a temporary mum. Bein bali mumen kovun, chokin, they do get a chelik, ve'oichlin, and they get to eat. And the Gemara is going to explain why. Avaloi makrivin, but they cannot be makriv a carbon because they're bali mumen. Kol shein roi lavoida, any person who's not royu to do avoida, einay chelik b'basar, does not get a chelik at a basar, which is right away a kasha, because a Baal Mum is not royal avodah. Yet he is chaylik b'basar. That the Gemara is going to explain. V'chol she'ein loy b'basar, and anybody who doesn't have a chaylik of meat, meaning the people we listed above, who if they want to line up to get a chaylik of the carbon to eat later, we won't give it to them. So too, ein loy ba'oris. If the hides of carbons are being distributed, that's nothing that's going to be eaten anyway. But once they're not in the category of those who are choylik, they don't get our either. Afilu tamei b'shas rikas damim v'tar b'shas hekter chalavim. Even if someone who was tamei b'shas zrika, but he'll become tar at night. Rashi says an example of that is kagon shetoval v'tar b'harav shemesh. It's full yoim. It's full yoim who during the day could not have eaten because he was tamei b'shas zrika. But at night, which is the time when they're makter chalavim, at that point he's allowed to eat. Still, einay chaylik b'basar, he will not get a chaylik b'basar. Shenemar hamakriv is dam hashlomim. The person who's makriv the dam hashlomim, the person who's royu to bring the carbon, if he has a chaylik in the Aaron, lo yisiya shoik hayom in l'mam. Who gets? Someone who's able to do the avodah. So I want to continue a little bit. I just need to take a more. I forgot to bring the next Gemara in the Mesifta. So let me get rid of this Gemara, and I will use a regular Gemara, and we will learn a little bit. We have some time, so we'll learn a little bit the next Gemara. Zok to Gemara. Minole. So we are going a little bit ahead, and we are learning Daf Tatak Tesh Amar Aleph. My camera cut out, so let me reconnect. Minole, or Minohanamili. How do we know this halacha that if you cannot do the avodah, you don't get to eat? Amar Shlokish Amar Kra Hakayin Hamachata Yisa Yoichlena. The kohen who is mechaper the carbon, mechate Rashi says is zerek es hadam. The kohen that zerek the dam, he's the one who gets yoichlana. Kohen mechate oichel, she'ena mechate ein oichel. So therefore, a Tvul Yoim and Mechusik Kippurim and Einin, all these people who are not royal avoda don't get a chelik. The problem is a Balmum is not royal avoda and he does get a chelik. So Zok Gemur Chalalahu, and this is where Shlock is talking because where Shlock is developing his pshat. So he asks on himself, Uchlalu, is that true? Arei Mishmar Kula, the Ein Mechatin, the entire Mishmar cannot do the Zrika of one carbon. Only one coin from the entire Mishmar does the Zrika. Right? It's one avoided per person. So the whole Mishmar shouldn't be entitled to take, and we know they are entitled to get. They didn't do the Zrika. It did a coin and Mechate Isa. Zok to Gemara, Uchlalu, by Mishmar Kula, the Ein Mechatin, V'Oichlin. Zok to Gemara, Royu Lechitu Ikarmina. What the Pasuk is saying is, they have to at least be eligible to do this Rika. A Tvul Yoim is not eligible to do this Rika. A Mechusik Kippurim and an Einin is not eligible to do this Rika. But the rest of the Kohanim and the Mishmar, even though they're not doing this Rika on this particular carbon, but they're royal to do this Rika. What about a cotton? Hare cotton then you're royal chitui. A cotton we know cannot do avoda. Nevertheless, the oichel, he gets a chelik. As Rashi says, cotton is posel avoda. The nafkalon may ish mizar chaludei in Perak HaKol Shorten and Chulin. But we know a cotton is entitled to get a piece of the action. B'menachos it says ish ke'achiv, ish chaylik, bein cotton chaylik. U'medamait mechaluka michlal dochel. So he doesn't get a chaylik, but he's allowed to eat. Why? Because we have a pasuk beferish that says if the cotton lines up to get a chaylik of the carbon, we don't give it to him. But he's still allowed to eat it. Void kol zocher, any zocher can eat it. So Dr. Gemara, Hare cotton, then you're lechitoi ve'oichel, and he does eat from the kachim. When it says koina machata oisai, when it says in the pasuk koina machata oisai yoichlena doesn't mean literally eat it. It means he will get a piece. He will be entitled to a chelik of the carbon. So therefore, royal lechitoi chelik, someone who's royal to do the avoida, to make this rika, he will get a chelik. And a cotton is not royal lechitoi, therefore he is not chelik. He doesn't get a piece, even though he might be able to eat korbanos. Frankly, balmum the ain't royal lechitoi. A balmum for sure is not royal to do the avoida. Yet the chelik, we know he does get a part of the carbon. So tomorrow balmum rachmona rabbi. There's a special pasuk that includes a balmum. It says, Kol Zochar B'Kohanim L'Rabbois Balmum. As Rashi says, Kol Zochar B'Kohanim Yoichal L'Rabbois Balmum L'Kamon Mukminolo B'Pirkin. Soon, in a couple of blot, the Gemara is going to teach us the L'Chaluka Rabbi. It even includes, it says Yoichal, but it really means Chaluka, that a Balmum is entitled to get a Chelik. Dila Achila cannot possibly mean Achila. Even though it says Kol Zochar B'Kohanim Yoichal, it can't literally mean eat. You know what? The ila achila lo yitzrach. You don't need a pasuk to tell you that a balmum is allowed to eat a carbon. It says beferish by a balmum that although he cannot do the avodah, he eats from the kachim. So therefore, when it says kol zocher b'kayanim, it must mean that he gets a chelik. Fragt Gemara b'ema kol zocher l'rabbi is tful yoim. Who said kol zocher is coming to be marbe a balmum? Maybe it's to be marbe a tful yoim. If we have to include one of these psulim to do the avodah, one of them to say that they get a chelik, it would be most logical to say that that applies to the balmum. Why? Because at least a balmum can eat kachim, but a tvul yoim and a mechusik kippurim and an onion is not allowed to eat kachim. So if we have to pick one of this list of people who can't do the avodah to say that the Torah says he gets a chelik, it would make sense to say it's the one that would be allowed to eat kachim. A tvul yoim is better than a balmum, because yes, maskim he can't eat right now, but tonight not only will he be able to eat, tonight he'll be able to avoid as well. True, but hashta miya halechazi. We're here and now. Here and now, the balmum is better off, is better positioned than the Tameh, than the Tful Yom. Rav Yosef Omer Michti. Let's analyze this for a second. And the Rashi Rabbi Yosef is l'Rabbis Tful Yom l'Chaluka le'Motasamis. You can't make an argument that the pasuk is trying to teach us that a Tful Yom gets a chelik of the carbon and not the Balmum. Why? Because Michti Ma'yer Chlani Chalkena. We already said that when it says Hakoyim Echados Yichlana, it doesn't mean Yichlana. It means Yichalkena. Why? Because we know Balmum could eat and he can't be Mechata. So it must be Yichalkena, although Balmum can eat, a Balmum doesn't get a chelik. So Zog to Gemara, Lichtoi Rachmani Yichalkena. Why does the Torah speak in a cryptic fashion? If it means Yichalkena, it should say Yichalkena. Why did the Torah use the word Yichlana? To tell you my Yichlana, why did the Torah use a word that is not ideal to describe Chalukah? Shemamina royu lachila chaylik, she'ena royu lachila ina chaylik. Only someone who's royu to eat kachim, like a balmum, he will get a chelik of the carbon. But a tful yoim, who right now is not royu lachila, right now he's not allowed to eat, he will not get a chelik of the carbon. Okay, we will stop here, Be'ez Hashem, and tomorrow we will be mamshel fighting. It's beautiful. The Gemara is starting to get easier. It's not such an uphill battle. Or could be because it's Hanukkah. So there's